The wind howled across the empty tundra as Dr. Elena Volkov tightened her fur-lined hood. Even after 15 years of Arctic research, she never quite got used to the bone-chilling cold. The thermometer on her heavy-duty jacket read -38 degrees Celsius. Her breath formed thick clouds in front of her face as she trudged through the snow, leading her small 4-person team across the vast white landscape. Just another 2 kilometers to the next testing site, Elena called back to her team, her voice nearly swallowed by the wind. They had been collecting permafrost samples for the past week, documenting the alarming rate at which the frozen ground was thawing due to rising global temperatures. Behind her walked Pavel, her research assistant of 5 years, carrying most of their scientific equipment. Then came Nikolai, their wilderness guide, whose family had lived in these remote parts of Siberia for generations. Taking up the rear was Irina, the team's photographer and drone operator, responsible for documenting their findings. "I still don't understand why we had to come all the way out here," grumbled Pavel, adjusting the heavy pack on his shoulders. The samples near the base camp were showing the same thaw patterns. Elena smiled under her scarf. Pavel complained every expedition, but his work was always flawless. "Because satellite imagery showed unusual heat signatures in this quadrant," she replied, turning to make sure her voice carried back to him. "Something is happening faster here than in the surrounding areas." The group fell silent again, focusing on placing one foot in front of the other through the knee-deep snow. Elena checked her GPS device. They were in one of the most remote regions of northern Siberia, hundreds of miles from the nearest town. Few people ever ventured this far into the frozen wilderness, which was precisely why Elena loved it. Out here, the tundra held secrets that had remained undisturbed for thousands of years. As they crested a small ridge, Elena stopped so suddenly that Pavel nearly bumped into her. "What's wrong?" he asked, but Elena didn't respond. She was staring straight ahead, her mouth slightly open behind her frost-covered scarf. "That's not possible," she whispered. The others joined her at the ridge, and one by one they fell silent too. In the distance, partially embedded in the snow and ice, sat something that had no business being there. The unmistakable shape of a massive cruise ship. "Am I hallucinating?" Irina said, rubbing her eyes with her gloved hands. "Is that a ship?" "Not just any ship," Nikolai said quietly. "That looks like a cruise liner. A big one." The vessel was tilted at an angle, its white hull standing in stark contrast to the endless landscape of white and blue ice. The ship's bow pointed skyward, as if it had been trying to sail up and out of the frozen ground. Even from this distance, they could make out rows of cabin windows and the ship's distinctive red funnel, now faded to a dull rust color. "This is hundreds of miles from any ocean," Pavel said, his voice a mix of confusion and awe. "It's not possible." Elena finally snapped out of her shock and reached for her binoculars. Through the lenses, she could make out the name painted on the hull, Aurora Borealis. "I know this ship," she said, lowering the binoculars. "Or rather, I know of it. My father used to talk about it. The Aurora Borealis disappeared during its maiden voyage in 1985. It was all over the news when I was a child." "Disappeared as in sank?" asked Irina. Elena shook her head. "No, disappeared as in vanished without a trace. One night it was sailing near the Arctic Circle, and the next morning it simply wasn't there anymore. No distress call. No debris, nothing. 342 people were on board." A heavy silence fell over the group as they processed this information. "We need to document everything," Elena finally said, her scientific mind taking over. "Irina, get the drone up." "I want aerial footage. Pavel, help me set up the satellite phone. We need to report this immediately." As Irina unpacked her drone, her hands trembling slightly from more than just the cold, Nikolai moved closer to Elena. "The elders in my village tell stories," he said in a low voice. "Stories about places in the far north where the veil between worlds grows thin. They say ships and people have vanished throughout history." Elena would normally dismiss such talk, but standing before the impossible, she found herself listening more carefully. "My grandmother spoke of vessels that could travel beneath the ice," Nikolai continued, "and of places where time flows differently." The whirring of Irina's drone broke the eerie silence as it took off into the pale sky. On her tablet screen, the full scale of their discovery became clear. The cruise ship was at least 300 meters long, its hull remarkably intact despite its impossible journey from the ocean. There were no tracks or signs of how it had traveled inland. It was as if some giant hand had plucked it from the sea and placed it here, where it had been slowly engulfed by the advancing and retreating ice over decades. The authorities won't be able to reach us for at least 3 days in this weather, Pavel reported after making the satellite call. They're sending a research team and military personnel, but the nearest helicopter is grounded due to the storm system moving in. Elena nodded, still staring at the ship. Something inside her, some mix of scientific curiosity and inexplicable dread, told her they couldn't wait. We're going to approach it, she decided. We'll set up camp about half a kilometer away and do preliminary external documentation. No one goes inside until authorities arrive. Understood? Everyone nodded, though no one looked particularly excited about getting closer to the ghostly vessel. It took them nearly 2 hours to reach the ship. Up close, it was even more unsettling. The aurora borealis towered above them, casting a long shadow across the snow. Ice had formed beautiful but ominous patterns across the hull, climbing up the sides like grasping fingers. The ship's lifeboats were still secured in their davits untouched. There's no damage to the hull, Pavel observed as they circled the vessel. If it hit ice or ran aground, there would be signs of impact. Elena noticed something else, a thin layer of unusual iridescent ice-coating parts of the hull. It seemed to shimmer with colors not typically found in nature, catching the low Arctic sunlight and breaking it into prismatic patterns. I've never seen ice formations like this, she said, carefully collecting a sample in a specimen jar. As they set up their camp within sight of the ship, the wind began to pick up, carrying with it the promise of another Arctic storm. Inside their reinforced tent, Elena reviewed the drone footage with Irina while Pavel analyzed the strange ice sample. Look at this, Irina said, pointing to her laptop screen. The drone had captured something none of them had noticed from the ground. A hatch on the ship's lower deck that appeared to have been forced open from the inside. Someone got out, Elena whispered. That night, as her team slept, Elena sat at the entrance of their tent, watching the aurora borealis. Not the ship, the actual northern lights which had begun to dance across the night sky in vibrant greens and purples. They seemed particularly active above the ship, almost as if drawn to it. In the shifting light, she could have sworn she saw shadows moving across the ship's deck. And just as she was about to wake the others, she heard it, faint but unmistakable. Music, the distant sound of a waltz, carrying across the frozen wasteland from a vessel that had been missing for nearly 40 years. Elena zipped her thermal suit up to her chin and reached for her flashlight. Against her better judgment, she stepped out into the cold night. The mystery of the aurora borealis was calling to her, and she knew she would not be able to rest until she uncovered the truth of what happened. To those 342 souls who had vanished into the Arctic. I'd all those years. Elena stood frozen in the Arctic night, the faint melody of waltz music drifting through the air. She glanced back at the tent where her team slept, wondering if she should wake them. The rational part of her brain, the scientist who had spent her career following evidence and data, told her she was hearing things. Sound played tricks in the wilderness, especially with the wind whistling across the empty tundra. Yet the music continued, rising and falling like distant memories. Pavel, she called, ducking back into the tent. Pavel, wake up! Her research assistant groaned, rolling over in his sleeping bag. What time is it? Just after midnight. I need you to listen to something. Pavel reluctantly followed Elena outside, pulling on his heavy coat. They stood together in the biting cold, breath-forming clouds in front of their faces. The northern lights continued their dance overhead, casting an eerie glow across the massive ship stuck in the ice. Do you hear that? Elena whispered. Pavel tilted his head, listening intently. After a moment, his eyes widened. Music? That's impossible. Wake the others, Elena said. We need to document this. Within minutes, the entire team stood outside their tent, recording equipment at the ready. Irina had her camera out, capturing both video and audio of the phenomenon. Nikolai, their wilderness guide, looked particularly uneasy. In my village, he said quietly, we have stories about ships that sail between worlds. The elders say music is how the dead call to the living. This isn't supernatural, Elena insisted, though with less conviction than she would have liked. There must be a scientific explanation. Perhaps the wind is creating some kind of resonance with the ship's structure. The music faded as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only the howl of the Arctic wind. The team looked at each other, a mixture of confusion and unease on their frost-nipped faces. "We should go back to sleep," Pavel suggested. "The authorities will be here in a couple of days. Let them handle it." But Elena couldn't let it go. "First light, we're going to examine the exterior of the ship more closely," she announced. "No one goes inside, but we need more data before the officials arrive." Sleep didn't come easily for any of them that night. Elena lay awake in her sleeping bag, listening for the phantom music, her mind racing with questions. How did a cruise ship end up hundreds of miles inland? Where were the passengers and crew? And why did the ship look so perfectly preserved after nearly 40 years? Morning arrived with a pale, weak sunlight that did little to warm the frozen landscape. After a quick breakfast of instant coffee and energy bars, the team geared up for a closer examination of the aurora borealis. "Irina, I want continuous drone surveillance," Elena instructed. "Pavel will collect samples from the hull and surrounding ice. Nikolai, you're our safety officer. Keep an eye out for structural dangers or weather changes." They approached the massive vessel with scientific caution but undeniable awe. Up close, the ship was even more impressive and unsettling. The white hull rose like a cliff face before them, partially embedded in the ice but otherwise intact. No signs of damage, no indication of how it had traveled here from the open ocean. "The preservation is remarkable," Pavel noted, running a gloved hand along the hull. "There's minimal corrosion, despite decades of exposure to extreme conditions." Elena nodded, taking photographs of the unusual iridescent ice formations they had spotted yesterday. "This ice has properties I've never encountered before," she said. "It seems to contain trace elements that aren't typically found in Arctic ice samples." Irina's drone buzzed overhead, capturing footage of the ship from various angles. "I'm getting some strange readings," she called from her control station several yards away. "There are temperature fluctuations all around the ship, hot spots where there shouldn't be any heat source." That caught Elena's attention. She joined Irina, studying the thermal imaging display on her tablet. Sure enough, there were distinct patches of warmth across the ship's hull, some approaching near room temperature despite the surrounding air being well below freezing. "That's impossible," Pavel said, looking over their shoulders at the readings. "A lot of impossible things happening around here," Elena murmured. Their investigation continued throughout the morning. They discovered more unusual features. A thin layer of some unknown material beneath the ice on the hull. Strange patterns of marine growth that didn't match known Arctic species. And most puzzlingly, a complete absence of snow accumulation on certain parts of the deck. Around midday, they found something even more baffling. Footprints in the snow leading away from the ship, then abruptly disappearing after about 50 meters. "These are recent," Nikolai said, kneeling to examine them. "Made within the last day or two." "That's not possible," Pavel insisted. "We would have seen anyone else out here. And our own tracks from yesterday are over there." He pointed to their clearly visible trail from the previous day's approach. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic temperature. "Could someone have come from the ship?" she asked quietly. Nikolai shook his head. "These prints lead away from the ship, not toward it. And look," he pointed at the distinct boot pattern. "These are old-style winter boots, not modern designs." The team exchanged uneasy glances. The implication hung in the frozen air between them. Someone or something had walked out of that ship recently, wearing outdated clothing. "We should check if that hatch is still open," Elena decided, referring to the emergency exit they had spotted on the drone footage yesterday. They circled around to the lower deck where the hatch had been visible. It was indeed open, a dark rectangle against the white hull with the emergency ladder partially extended down to the ice. Frost had formed around the edges of the opening, but not inside it, suggesting the interior might somehow be warmer than the outside air. "Hello?" Elena called toward the opening, her voice echoing back at her. "Is anyone there?" Only silence answered. "We agreed not to go inside," Pavel reminded her nervously. "We should wait for the authorities." Elena nodded reluctantly. "You're right, but we can at least use the drone to look inside the hatch, see what's visible without entering." Irina maneuvered her small drone toward the opening, its lights illuminating a short corridor beyond. The drone's camera revealed a perfectly preserved interior passageway, emergency lights still somehow glowing with a dim red light. That's impossible, Pavel said for the third time that day. No power source could last 40 years. As they watched the drone footage, something moved in the shadows at the far end of the corridor. Just a flicker. There and gone so quickly they couldn't be sure they'd seen anything at all. Did you see that? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could answer, their satellite phone rang, startling all of them. Pavel answered it, speaking in rapid Russian to whoever was on the other end. The authorities, he explained after hanging up. The storm has passed quicker than expected. They'll be here by helicopter tomorrow morning. They're bringing a full research team and military personnel. We should mark a landing zone, Nikolai suggested, clearly relieved that help was coming. As the others busied themselves with preparations, Elena found herself drawn back to the ship, staring up at its impossible presence. Just as she turned to rejoin her team, she noticed something she had missed before. A face at one of the cabin windows, pale and indistinct, watching her. When she blinked, it was gone. That night, the music returned louder than before. And this time, Elena could have sworn she heard voices singing along, distant and distorted, as if coming from the bottom of the sea. None of them slept, sitting together in their tent. Recording equipment running, waiting for morning and the arrival of people who might help them make sense of what they had found frozen in time, in the middle of nowhere. Whatever secrets the Aurora Borealis held, Elena knew one thing for certain. They were about to change everything she thought she understood about the world. Morning came with no sign of the promised helicopter. Elena paced outside their tent, repeatedly trying the satellite phone while her team packed up their equipment. Still nothing, she reported, frustration evident in her voice. The signal keeps dropping. Pavel checked their emergency radio. Weather report says another storm is moving in faster than expected. They might have had to delay the flight. Elena looked up at the sky. It was clear now, but on the horizon dark clouds were gathering. In the Arctic, weather changed with frightening speed. If a major storm hit, they could be stranded for days. We need to make a decision, she told her team as they huddled together for warmth. We can either wait it out and hope they reach us before the storm, or we can do a quick preliminary investigation inside the ship. At least it would provide better shelter than our tent if the storm hits full force. You want to go inside? Irina asked, her eyes wide. After everything strange that's happened? I don't like it either, Elena admitted. But scientifically speaking, we have an unprecedented opportunity here. And practically speaking, that ship has survived decades of Arctic weather. It's probably safer than our tent if this storm is as bad as the forecast suggests. They debated back and forth for several minutes. Finally, Nikolai, who had been quiet throughout the discussion, spoke up. My grandmother used to say that some mysteries demand to be solved, he said slowly. Perhaps we were meant to find this ship. Perhaps we are meant to learn its secrets. Pavel looked skeptical. That's not very scientific. Neither is a cruise ship in the middle of the tundra, Nikolai replied with a shrug. Elena made her decision. We'll do a quick, careful examination of just the first level inside. We stay together at all times. We document everything, and at the first sign of danger we leave immediately. Agreed? Everyone nodded, though no one looked particularly eager to enter the ghostly vessel. They approached the open hatch they had discovered the day before, carrying extra supplies, emergency equipment, and all their documentation tools. Elena went first, climbing the partially extended emergency ladder with cautious determination. The others followed, each face a mask of nervous anticipation. The corridor beyond the hatch was dimly lit by emergency lights that somehow still functioned after nearly 40 years. The air inside was noticeably warmer than outside. Not comfortable, but well above freezing. This shouldn't be possible, Pavel whispered, his scientific mind clearly struggling with what his senses were telling him. No backup power system could last this long. Elena ran her hand along the wall. There was no dust. Everything looked clean, almost as if the ship was still in operation. Check your instruments, she instructed. I want readings on air quality, temperature, radiation, everything. As Pavel busied himself with the readings, Elena led them deeper into the ship. They passed through a narrow service corridor that opened into a wider passenger area. What they found there stopped them in their tracks. The main dining hall of the Aurora Borealis lay before them, perfectly preserved. Tables were set with fine china and crystal glasses. Half-eaten meals sat on plates now frozen solid. Wine glasses still held dark liquid, also frozen. A buffet table along one wall displayed an array of foods in various states of consumption. Most disturbing of all, there was no sign of panic or hasty departure. Everything was arranged as if the passengers had simply vanished in the middle of their evening meal. "It's like they all disappeared in an instant," Irina whispered, snapping photos with shaking hands. Elena approached one of the tables. A napkin was folded neatly beside a plate of what appeared to be beef stroganoff. A handbag hung from the back of an empty chair. She carefully opened it, finding a wallet, makeup, and a small book inside. "This belonged to someone named Lydia Petrova," she said, examining the ID in the wallet. According to her passport, she was 67 years old in 1985. "Look at this," Nikolai called from across the room. He was standing by what appeared to be the captain's table, distinguished by its location and the naval uniform jacket hanging on one of the chairs. "The ship's daily program. It says there was meant to be a formal dinner followed by dancing in the ballroom at 9 p.m. Elena checked her watch out of habit, though she knew it made no sense. It was as if her brain was trying to place these events in a timeline that had long since ended. "Let's check the kitchen," she suggested, pointing to swinging doors at the far end of the dining hall. The ship's galley was just as eerily preserved. Pots still sat on stoves. Plates of garnishes waited to be added to meals that would never be served. A large cake decorated with Bon Voyage sat ready to be presented. "The food should have rotted or been eaten by animals," Pavel said, examining a tray of what appeared to be perfectly preserved shrimp cocktails. "This defies all natural laws of decomposition." "Maybe it's the cold?" Irina suggested. "Not even deep freezing would preserve food like this for 40 years, Pavel replied. "And anyway, it's not that cold in here. The thermometer says it's about 4 degrees Celsius. They continued their exploration, moving from the kitchen to a corridor that led toward the front of the ship. Along the way, they passed cabins with doors ajar, revealing glimpses of personal belongings, books open on beds, clothing laid out for the evening, jewelry placed on dressing tables. Eventually, they reached the bridge, the ship's command center. Like everything else, it showed no signs of emergency or evacuation. Charts were still laid out on tables. Coffee mugs sat at various workstations. The ship's wheel stood unattended. "The captain's log," Elena said, spotting a large book secured near the main controls. She carefully opened it, turning to the final entries. "Last entry is from 11:43 p.m., April 17, 1985, she read aloud. "It says the lights in the sky are moving toward us. They're unlike any aurora I've seen. God help us all." A chill ran through the group that had nothing to do with the temperature. Elena looked up from the logbook and noticed the ship's clock on the wall. It had stopped at exactly 11:52 p.m., 9 minutes after the final log entry. Pavel, who had been examining the ship's instruments, called them over. "The radar was active when whatever happened took place," he said, pointing to the old green screen display. "Look at the final image." The radar screen showed several unusual objects surrounding the ship, objects that were not consistent with other vessels or icebergs. They appeared as perfect circles arranged in a larger circle around the aurora borealis. "What could cause that pattern?" Irina asked. Before anyone could answer, a low hum began to emanate from the ship's walls. The emergency lights, which had been steady until now, began to flicker. And then, impossibly, the radar screen lit up, showing the same pattern of circles they had just been examining. "It's activating," Pavel said in disbelief. "But how? There's no power source." The humming grew louder. The temperature in the room began to drop rapidly, their breath suddenly visible in the air. "We need to leave," Elena decided instantly. "Now!" They hurried back the way they had come, through the passenger corridors, past the dining hall with its frozen meals and empty chairs, back toward the emergency hatch where they had entered. Just as they reached the service corridor leading to their exit, Elena stopped. From somewhere deeper in the ship, she heard music, the same waltz they had heard from outside the night before, and with it the sound of laughter and conversation as if a party was in full swing. "Do you hear that?" she asked her team. Their pale faces and wide eyes told her they did. Without another word, they rushed for the exit, climbing down the emergency ladder as quickly as safety allowed. Back outside in the biting Arctic air, they looked at each other with a mixture of scientific excitement and primal fear. Whatever had happened to the aurora borealis and its passengers, They had just witnessed evidence that some echo of those events was still active, still cycling through time like a phantom recording. As if to underscore this realization, the northern lights began to appear overhead, dancing in the same pattern they had seen on the ship's radar, circles within circles, spinning in the sky above the impossible vessel. Back in their tent, Elena's team huddled together, trying to process what they had just experienced. The wind outside had picked up significantly, confirming that the predicted storm was on its way. The helicopter wouldn't be coming today. "We need to review what we found," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. She was trying to maintain scientific objectivity. But the ship had shaken her worldview to its core. "Irina, let's see the photos and video you took inside." "That's impossible," Pavel whispered. "We were all together. There was no one else there." Irina continued scrolling through her images, stopping at another photo taken in a different part of the ship. Again, in the background, a blurry figure stood in a doorway. "Check the video," Elena instructed, her scientific curiosity overcoming her unease. The video footage showed their exploration of the ship, the camera panning across empty rooms and corridors. Elena watched intently, looking for any sign of the figures from the photos. Then she saw it, a shadow moving across a doorway, there and gone in an instant. "Pause it," she said. "Go back." Irina rewound the footage frame by frame. There, for just 3 frames, a figure crossed the corridor behind them.
None of them had noticed it at the time. Could it be a reflection?
"A trick of the light?" Pavel suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Elena shook her head. "I don't think so. But I'm not ready to jump to supernatural conclusions either. There must be an explanation." "I found something when we were leaving," Nikolai said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small object wrapped in his handkerchief. "I should have mentioned it sooner, but with everything that happened." He unwrapped the object, revealing an old-fashioned film camera. It was on one of the tables in the ballroom. "I grabbed it on our way out." Elena carefully took the camera, examining it. "It's a Kodak from the 1980s, and it still has film inside. It hasn't been fully exposed." "We could develop it," Irina suggested. "I have some basic developing equipment in my photography kit." "You carry film developing equipment on Arctic expeditions?" Pavel asked incredulously. Irina shrugged. "I'm old school. Digital is convenient, but film captures something special. I always bring a small developing kit just in case I want to use my film camera." "Let's do it," Elena decided. "We can set up a makeshift darkroom in the equipment tent." The storm raged outside as they worked to develop the film in their tiny makeshift darkroom. The process was challenging in such conditions, but Irina was skilled. Slowly, images began to appear on the paper. The first photos showed typical cruise activities: passengers enjoying meals, playing games on deck, posing by the railing with icebergs in the background. Ordinary vacation snapshots from 1985, now developed 40 years later in the middle of nowhere. Then came photos from what appeared to be the formal dinner and dance mentioned in the ship's program. Passengers in evening wear smiling at the camera. The captain making a toast. Couples dancing beneath decorative lights in the ballroom. "These must have been taken just hours before whatever happened," Elena murmured, studying the faces of people who had vanished decades ago. The next photo made them all gasp. It showed the same ballroom, the same dancers, but surrounding them were tall, elongated silhouettes that seemed to glow with an inner light. The human dancers appeared unaware of these strange figures among them. "What are those?" Pavel whispered. "Look at the next one," Irina said, her voice barely audible. The next image showed the dance floor from a different angle. The strange luminous figures were more numerous, now clearly interacting with the human dancers, though the humans still showed no awareness of their presence. The final photo on the roll was the most disturbing. It showed the ship's deck at night. The northern lights filled the sky above, but they weren't the typical curtains of color. Instead, they formed a distinct spiral pattern directly above the ship, sending down what looked like tendrils of light that touched the deck. Several passengers stood with upturned faces, arms outstretched toward the descending light. "My God," Elena whispered. "What happened to these people?" The developed photos confirmed something they had all suspected, but been afraid to voice. Whatever had happened to the Aurora Borealis wasn't a natural disaster or mechanical failure. It was something far stranger. "We need to go back in," Elena said after a long silence. "Are you crazy?" Pavel protested. "After what we just saw?" That's precisely why we need to go back, Elena insisted. We're scientists. We have evidence of something unprecedented, something that challenges our understanding of reality. We can't just ignore it. The authorities will be here once the storm passes, Pavel argued. And they'll likely lock down the site and classify everything we've found, Elena countered. This might be our only chance to properly document what's inside that ship. There's more to discover, I'm sure of it. After much debate, they agreed on a compromise. They would return to the ship in the morning, but this time with a specific goal: to check the cargo hold. If the passenger areas were so well preserved, the hold might contain even more clues about what happened. That night, as the storm raged around them, Elena couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the glowing figures from the photographs, dancing among unsuspecting humans. She thought about the captain's final log entry about strange lights in the sky, and the ship's radar showing circular objects surrounding the vessel. What troubled her most was a theory forming in her mind, one that seemed too fantastic to voice aloud, yet increasingly difficult to dismiss. What if the aurora borealis, the actual northern lights, weren't just a natural phenomenon? What if they were something more, something intelligent, something that had taken an interest in the ship and its passengers? In the middle of the night, Elena stepped outside her tent briefly, needing fresh air despite the storm. Through gaps in the swirling snow, she could see the northern lights still dancing above the ship, their pattern unusual and somehow deliberate. And for just a moment, so briefly she would later question if she had imagined it, she thought she saw light emanating from the ship's windows, and shadows moving inside, as if a party from 40 years ago continued uninterrupted by the passage of time. Tomorrow they would venture back into the impossible vessel. And Elena knew with absolute certainty that what they would find in the cargo hold would change everything, not just for their small team, but potentially for humanity's understanding of its place in the universe.